The night I folded my trumpet back into its case instead of boarding that Greyhound to New York, the neon outside the club kept flickering like it couldn't decide whether to let me go or beg me to stay. I can still see that sign in my mind, red letters buzzing against the wet Chicago pavement, the rain turning 63rd Street into a river of broken light. It was late February, 1959, cold enough that the wind off Lake Michigan sliced through wool coats like they were made of paper. Inside the club, though, it was all heat and smoke and the smell of spilled rye whiskey soaked into wood older than Prohibition. I was 22 and thought the world was finally tuning itself to my key. We played Thursday through Sunday at a place called the Blue Lantern, a narrow room with vinyl booths cracked at the seams and an upright piano that leaned slightly left, like it was tired of standing up straight. The piano was always a little out of tune, but in those days we said that gave it character. Everything had character back then, meaning it was flawed and we loved it anyway. I'd stand under those stage lights, my trumpet warm in my hands, cigarette smoke curling up past my face, and I felt bigger than the brick buildings outside. When we hit the bridge in autumn in New York, I'd close my eyes and hold a note just a shade longer than expected, feel the room lean toward me. You can sense it when a room leans. It's a living thing. It breathes with you. That winter, a touring band out of Detroit came through. They were tight, sharp suits, clean harmonies, a tenor sax player who could make you forget your own name. Their bandleader, a tall fellow with a thin mustache and a voice like sanded oak, pulled me aside between sets. Said they were heading to New York in March. Had connections at Birdland. Needed a trumpet who could both read charts and bend a note like it was confessing. You got that bend, he told me. You don't overplay. That's rare. I carried those words home like a medal in my pocket. Home was 3 blocks east, above my sister Margaret's grocery store. Harris and Family Grocers, the sign said, though by then the and family did most of the heavy lifting. My brother-in-law, Tommy, had put that sign up in '53 when the neighborhood still believed in steady shifts at the steel mill and predictable paydays. Tommy was a good man. Big hands, soft voice. He'd leave before dawn, boots laced, thermos full of coffee Margaret brewed strong enough to float a horseshoe. That January, a machine malfunctioned. There was a noise, someone said later, like a car backfiring inside a tin can. By the time they shut everything down, it was already done. I won't describe the rest. Some things don't need replaying to be understood. Margaret was 31 with 2 children, Eddie, 6, who liked to line up toy cars in perfect rows, and little Clara, barely 3, with curls that refused to be tamed. The mill sent a check that looked larger than it was. The union men came by, hats in hand, saying words like tragedy and support. But tragedy doesn't stock shelves or pay the electric bill. The week I was offered New York was the same week the radiator in the store started knocking like it had something to complain about. The winter wind crept under the front door and made the bell jangle without anyone coming in. We kept a little space heater behind the counter for Margaret, but even then her hands stayed cold. She tried to smile when I told her about the offer. New York, she said, like it was a foreign country. That's something, Danny. She'd always called me Danny, even after I started insisting on Dan at the clubs. You should go, she added, too quickly. Tommy would have told you the same. There was a ledger open on the counter between us, pages filled with neat columns of numbers and the occasional handwritten IOU. Mrs. Kowalski owed $12. $47 for groceries she'd promised to settle after her son found work. Old Mr. Jenkins had a line under his name longer than I liked, but he always paid eventually. The store survived on trust and thin margins. Outside, a streetcar rattled past, sparks flashing along the overhead wires. The radio behind the counter played low, Miles Davis, I think. Or maybe it was Coltrane. Hard to remember which night held which song back then. Jazz drifted through the thin apartment walls upstairs, too. In that neighborhood, music didn't ask permission. You can't run this place alone, I said. She shrugged. I'll manage. But her eyes flicked toward the back room where Eddie was supposed to be finishing his homework. Clara's cough echoed faintly from upstairs. Margaret hadn't slept more than 3 hours at a stretch since the funeral. The band leader gave me a week to decide. That week felt like standing between two rhythms, both insisting they were the true downbeat. At night, under the blue lantern lights, I'd imagine myself stepping onto a New York stage, horn raised, applause rolling over me like a warm tide. I pictured narrow walk-ups in Harlem, late-night jam sessions, critics scribbling my name into notebooks. I told myself I wasn't chasing fame, just the chance to see how far my sound could travel. During the day, I stocked canned tomatoes and swept salt from the entryway. I learned which suppliers might extend credit another month and which ones needed cash on delivery. I carried 50-pound sacks of potatoes into the back room and tried not to think about how different that weight felt from the weight of a trumpet. One afternoon, the wind came hard off the lake, rattling the store windows so violently that Clara started crying upstairs. I climbed up to check on her. She was standing in her crib, small fists gripping the rail, tears shining on her cheeks. "It's just the weather," I told her, lifting her into my arms. "Chicago likes to remind us who's boss." She pressed her face into my shoulder and hiccuped until she settled. In that moment, the thought of boarding a bus and leaving her to that rattling wind felt less like adventure and more like abandonment. Still, the music wouldn't quiet. On my last Sunday at the Blue Lantern before the decision, the club was packed. Snow had started falling, soft and steady, turning the street outside into a hush. Inside, the crowd leaned close together, coats piled at the end of booths, glasses clinking in low light. The piano was especially out of tune that night, but it didn't matter. When my solo came, I let it stretch. Not flashy, just honest. I thought about New York. I thought about Margaret's ledger. I thought about Tommy's empty chair at the kitchen table. Every note felt like a question mark. After the set, the bandleader from Detroit was waiting by the bar. He didn't waste words. "We leave Thursday," he said. "Bus at noon. You in?" I looked past him at the stage, at my trumpet resting on its stand. The stage lights were still on, casting a lonely glow over empty chairs. Thursday at noon. The next morning, I walked down to the Greyhound station before dawn, just to see it. The building smelled like diesel and burnt coffee. A few travelers hunched over paper cups, collars turned up. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and imagined myself among them, ticket in hand, heart pounding. Instead, I turned around and walked back towards 63rd Street, snow crunching under my shoes, the sky just beginning to lighten over the brick rooftops. By the time Thursday came, I had my answer. The band was loading instruments into the bus's belly when I arrived. The bandleader spotted me and gave a small nod, like he already knew. "You sure?" he asked. I was sure and I wasn't. My chest felt like it was splitting along a seam I didn't know I had. "Yeah," I said. "I'm sure." He studied me for a moment, then stuck out his hand. "You've got something special, kid. Don't let it rust." I promised I wouldn't. The bus doors folded shut with a hydraulic sigh. I stood there as it pulled away, exhaust curling into the cold air, and for a second I thought I heard my own horn in the engine's rumble. Maybe I imagined that part. Memory can be generous. I walked back to the store, the winter sun pale and thin above the rooftops. When I pushed open the door, the bell gave its usual tired jangle. Margaret looked up from the counter, surprise flickering across her face. "You missed it?" she asked. I set my trumpet case down gently behind the counter. "No," I said. "I didn't." Margaret held my gaze for a long moment, the kind of look only an older sister can give, half gratitude, half worry that you've done something foolish on her account. "You didn't have to," she said quietly. "I know," I answered, and that was the truth. Nobody had forced my hand. That's what made it heavier and lighter at the same time. Life doesn't announce its turning points with trumpets. Sometimes it's just the soft click of a cash register drawer closing, the scratch of a pen across a ledger, the steady sweep of a broom after closing time. I took over the early deliveries first. Up at 5, coat collar turned high against the lake wind, meeting the produce truck in the alley while the sky was still bruised purple. The driver, a Polish fellow named Marek, would hand down crates of apples and heads of lettuce wrapped in damp paper. We didn't say much. Breath hung in the air between us like smoke. By 8, the neighborhood was awake. Streetcars rattled past, sparks snapping above the wires. Women in wool coats pushed strollers through slush. Men with lunch pails stopped in for coffee and a roll. I learned how to slice cold cuts thin enough to please Mrs. Donnelly but thick enough to stretch the supply. I learned that Mr. Jenkins liked his eggs cracked open so he could inspect them before paying. At night, after we locked the door, I'd sit at the small kitchen table upstairs with the ledger open and the radio humming low. Jazz drifted through from the apartment next door, some kid practicing saxophone, all hunger and no patience. I'd tap my fingers against the wood in time, my trumpet case leaning against the wall like a quiet accusation. For a while, I still played at the Blue Lantern on weekends. The band leader from Detroit sent a postcard from New York that first spring. A simple thing, skyline sketched in blue ink, a few lines about crowded clubs and long nights. "You'd eat this city alive," he wrote. I kept that card tucked inside my trumpet case. But something subtle had shifted in me. When I stood under those stage lights now, I felt the weight of morning deliveries waiting. I couldn't stretch a solo the way I used to without seeing Clara's curls bouncing as she ran through the store aisles or Eddie's serious little face bent over arithmetic at the counter. One Friday night, a talent scout from a bigger Chicago venue came in. Word had traveled about the Detroit offer I'd turned down, and that made me interesting in a different way, like a story people wanted to solve. "You ever think about coming north?" he asked between sets. "We've got a spot opening up. Better pay. Better crowd." I thought about it. Of course I did. The North Side clubs had brighter lights, cleaner bathrooms, critics who actually wrote things down. But I also thought about the stack of unpaid invoices on the kitchen table and the way Margaret's shoulders finally seemed to relax when she heard my key in the door at night. "I'm good where I am," I told him. He laughed softly. "Nobody's ever good where they are." I let him believe that. The store became its own kind of stage. You'd be surprised how much performance is involved in selling groceries. You learn timing, when to crack a joke, when to extend credit, when to hold firm. You read faces the way I used to read sheet music. Some days the rhythm was smooth, other days it stumbled. But it was music all the same. Eddie grew tall enough to reach the top shelf by the time he was 10. I showed him how to balance the register, how to greet customers by name. Clara liked to sit on the flour sacks and hum along to the radio, her small voice weaving through whatever tune was playing. Sometimes I'd lift my trumpet and play a quiet harmony under her humming. She'd giggle like we'd discovered a secret. There were hard years. The early 60s brought new supermarkets with shiny aisles and fluorescent lights that made our place look dim and tired. Business thinned. Margaret and I argued over prices, over whether to modernize or hold steady. I took a second job for a while, stocking shelves overnight at one of those very supermarkets that threatened us. The irony wasn't lost on me. On the walk home after those shifts, the city felt different. Quieter, but restless. Neon signs reflected in wet pavement. Somewhere, always, a saxophone practice behind a half-open window. That sound would catch in my chest and pull tight. Not painful exactly, just present. A reminder. I won't pretend I never wondered what might have happened if I'd boarded that bus. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open the trumpet case and take out the postcard from New York. I'd imagine smoky clubs in Manhattan, my name on a small marquee, applause rising like steam from a crowded room. But then I'd hear Clara coughing softly in the next room, or the radiator knocking its familiar complaint, and I'd feel something steadier than applause. Responsibility doesn't roar. It hums. By the late 60s, the neighborhood had changed. Factories closed. Families moved. The Blue Lantern shuttered its doors one spring without much ceremony. I walked past the darkened windows a week later and saw my reflection in the glass, older than I felt, hair thinning at the temples. For a second, I didn't recognize the man looking back. Margaret sold the store in '72. We'd kept it afloat longer than anyone expected, but time has a way of rewriting business plans. The last day, we stood behind the counter together, hands resting on wood worn smooth by decades of elbows and coins. The new owners talked about renovations, brighter lights, self-serve aisles. After they left, Margaret reached under the counter and pulled out the old ledger. The pages were yellowed, edges curled. She ran her fingers over the names, Kowalski, Jenkins, Donnelly, like they were family. "We did all right," she said. "We did," I agreed. That night, I took my trumpet up to the roof of the building. The air was thick with summer heat, the lake breeze mercifully gentle for once. From somewhere down the block, a radio played an old standard, one we used to close the Blue Lantern with. I lifted the horn to my lips and let the melody rise into the dark. I didn't play it like I had at 22. The notes were softer, rounder, less concerned with impressing anyone. They were shaped by grocery aisles and school recitals, by IOUs and early mornings, by laughter over burnt toast and tears at quiet gravesides. As I played, windows opened. A few neighbors leaned out, listening. No applause, no spotlight, just shared air and a familiar tune floating above brick and asphalt. That's when I understood something I wish I'd known earlier: the road not taken doesn't disappear. It becomes a harmony line. You don't always hear it clearly, but it's there, under everything, giving depth to the melody you chose. Even now, sitting here at this kitchen table with you, the light low and the house quiet, I can sometimes catch that harmony. A distant saxophone through an open window. The rumble of a bus engine in winter. The soft click of a register drawer closing. Do I wonder who I might have been in New York? Of course I do. I'm human. There's a version of me out there who chased every solo and never learned the price of potatoes. Maybe he's famous. Maybe he's forgotten. I'll never know. But I know this: Eddie grew up steady. Clara found her own music, she teaches piano now, patient as a metronome. Margaret laughs more easily than she did that winter. And the man I became, the one who stayed, learned that recognition fades faster than responsibility fulfilled. Sometimes the music you don't play stays with you longer than the music you do. It hums in your chest on quiet nights, not as regret exactly, but as proof that you once stood at a crossroads and listened carefully. And when the wind comes off the lake, sharp and insistent, I still hear that Greyhound bus pulling away. I tip my head, just slightly, like I'm acknowledging an old bandmate across a crowded room. Then I close my eyes and let the melody I chose carry me home.